Welcome to the Digital Forester podcast, where we talk to foresters about how they are using digital technologies in their day-to-day forestry work. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Digital Forester podcast. Today, I'm joined by Clint Graumann. He's the CEO of NUVIEW. Clint, how are you doing today?
Good, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So I know I always say this at every start of a podcast, that I'm excited to speak to the person. But in this case, I have to admit, I am really intrigued, curious, and I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot of things because we're actually going to be talking about Lidar from space and a commercial offering. And so before we get into it, maybe introduce yourself and your background. I know we have some mutual acquaintances. I know when I was traveling, maybe a year and a half ago, someone mentioned to me, hey, there's this company out there that's looking at LiDAR from space. And of course, many listeners are probably laughing, going like, oh, you can't do LiDAR from space. Otherwise, the footprint's so big, it's meaningless, etc. And I'm sure we will educate the listeners as well as myself. But I heard about this and I was like, interesting, something in stealth mode. But before we get into that, I know you were working with Blackbridge back in the day. And again, this is not going that far back. You've worked with Agrian, you worked Terrametric before you got to NUVIEW, but maybe share your journey and how you got to where you are today.
So again, thanks for having me on the podcast. And our journey actually begins even just a little bit further back than that. The real, I think, beginning of how everything led to NUVIEW began with a company called Rapid Eye, which was a predecessor to Blackbridge. So Blackbridge was based out of Lethbridge, Alberta, and purchased us. We at Rapid Eye were the first commercial small sat constellation, electro-optical, 5 bands, image anywhere on Earth, any day kind of approach. And that really led my views on what valuable data sets exist out in the world. And from my perspective, one of the most valuable data sets is one that's consistent at a global scale and provides a foundation on which all other geospatial data can be built as foundational geospatial intelligence. We went through that path of really setting a strong foundation in wide area coverage. And then, as you mentioned, we were purchased by Blackbridge, and then we were purchased by Planet Labs. I took a little bit of a left turn and worked in agricultural software, but it's not as much of a left turn as what you think, because it was geospatial in nature. It incorporated a lot of satellite imagery, and it was really taking the geospatial data to the grassroots effort, no pun intended, to the ground and to the end user. And I think that was just a huge shaper of my views on how valuable data can be in the user's hands. And then Terrametric was an outgrowth of all of that experience, knowing that we could bring something to the table that would help Earth observation companies in the startup arena really set a strong foundation for their business. And so we did a lot of consulting work on synthetic aperture radar, on optical, thermal, hyperspectral, the whole gamut. And one thing I continuously heard across every market and every set of end users is, if we could get some LiDAR data to go with our, and insert your phenomenology here, like, everything would be better. And after years of hearing that, like, we finally put together the pieces that this is something that the world wants and needs. And so out of that, NUVIEW was born.
Amazing. And I think schooling was at Oklahoma State University. And so was that connected? Like you study like Earth observation or satellites, or was there an interesting life journey or a pivot earlier on that got you on this amazing career by the looks of it?
Yeah, I had some great coursework in geography and geology and all of the sciences that go around that. But it really was pivotal in the business acumen that I think I have, and the grit and determination that you have as an entrepreneur. Like, that's the one intangible I know from all Oklahomans, and they're actually kind of like Albertans in that they're just like really just hardcore, hard work ethic, get it done no matter what attitude. But my real schooling in Earth observation came when I joined Rapid Eye 15 years ago. And it was really straight into the crucible and trial by fire. And I think from that, it's really shaped everything in how I approach the business.
Amazing, amazing. And so as we look forward, you have a new team now at NUVIEW. Were these, and I've looked at the website, there's a lot of, we'll see, I don't know if high powered is the right word, but a lot of notable folks that are working at NUVIEW. Were these people that you knew beforehand, was this a bit of that relationship building over the years, 15 years journey that you just kind of met these people and it made sense to come together?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both. For 15 years, having worked in all these different phenomenologies, we have, as you mentioned, incredibly high-powered people on the team that have worked in very influential positions, from stakeholders in government who were in charge of procuring this type of geospatial data for U.S. government, scientists who worked for the U.S. government in the Air Force Research Lab that were basically the chief of the Air Force Research Lab that was in charge of building and designing these instruments for the U.S. Air Force. And then, in addition, all of the experts and capabilities along the way, especially early days, I've been able to draw from 15 years of doing it in the trenches, basically, and making it happen. And then, but once we started NUVIEW and once we came out of stealth mode, the number of people that want to work for a company that's the first to do something, like the first of anything, is just truly compelling. And what I've found is that the engineering team that we've put together is just really an A team of people that want to tackle the world's biggest problem in Earth observation, and be the first to do it.
Amazing, amazing. And if my research is correct, NUVIEW venture backed, you guys did a raise recently, and obviously have great growth trajectory. I think there's a lot of opportunities, as you mentioned, stakeholders or even prospective clients that have already signed on board as excitement. But I suspect our listeners or the audience are probably, some are techie, even though it's the digital forester.
Right.
Most of them use airborne LiDAR or linear mode LiDAR, and many of them have followed the ISATs and the JEDIs, the government or the public funded satellite ones, and they're probably maybe thinking this is not physically possible to do maybe high precision mapping, if that's the right term. But can you introduce us to the nature of this new LiDAR product that you're trying to bring to the market as a commercial offering?
Sure. Yeah. So again, wide area coverage is the basis of everything that we do. But we've got some pretty compelling IP that's we've developed internally on the ability to do some high intensity imaging. So I won't go into the exact hows of it, but I think I can explain it enough on the air that people will get it. So you've basically got an equation that involves four different variables that I think are pretty meaningful. One, do you have a powerful enough laser to take care of the atmospheric attenuation? And the answer on that one is yes. I think we'll be one of the most powerful lasers that's ever been put in space, but yet we're at an altitude where it's still safe, even eye safe, to be able to run it from space. The second part of that is the size of your aperture and how much light you can collect. And that's a problem that is also, it's an engineering problem. It's not a physics problem. And so we've had some great backing to be able to accomplish that specific piece, to do that. The other part of the equation is power. How much power can we supply to the bus? Because a hot laser requires a lot of power. And I would say 5 years ago, there weren't many small or commercial small sat bus manufacturers that could hit that type of power. But over the last few years, we've seen it become commercially feasible. And so it wasn't, again, an engineering question or a physics problem. It was commercial feasibility. Could we build a small sat powerful enough to power that? And then there's altitude on top of that. Can we get to the right altitude that's nominal for being able to tackle laser power, the power that the bus is able to create, and then sustain from that altitude the right level of observation. And then there's a fourth part of the equation, which is highly, I guess, appropriated to our internal capabilities, in that we do something that's akin to a staring spotlight mode in a synthetic aperture radar satellite. In that, when we try to increase the intensity, our satellite will have more than one way to be able to stare at an object for long periods of time. So if you think about foundational geospatial intelligence, it's mowing the grass, right? It's just covering the planet at a specific foundational level. But when something's really important, let's say that we wanted to get really intense opportunities for foliage penetration, or we wanted to be able to understand an object in 3D with high fidelity, staring and our proprietary steering approaches are really what get us there.
Very cool, very cool. So thinking of maybe in a forestry context, a lot of people are used to airborne linear mode or single photon or Geiger mode. Is your product going to be able to rival those types of uh, point densities that folks are used to? Because I know you're targeting USGS, what is it, quality level 2 as meeting that.
Right.
So maybe what can you say about that? Is when people they're talking about this, they're always thinking of like postings or number of points per square meter. Like how can you connect the dots for our listeners on that front?
Yeah, our goal is to create a global digital elevation model that's derived from a standard of what's equivalent to quality level 2 data from USGS. And we want to have the world's gold standard for digital elevation models. And for us, that means we want to be able to hit a couple of points per square meter. We want spatial resolution that's sub 1 meter. And we want the best vertical accuracy that you can get from space in a real measurement. And so quality level 2 is where we found that's the end result of all of those other pieces of the equation that I mentioned earlier. And quality level 2 is when we're push brooming the world. So again, when we're just mowing the grass and we're collecting data, we're collecting at that quality level 2 standard, or will be collecting at the quality level 2 standard. But as you image again and again, with the ability to revisit over and over with 20 satellites, you start to build up these layers of points, and then you can create 3D change detection. You get more points over the same forested area, so you got more opportunities for light to hit the ground through the canopy of trees. And if you think over time, we don't have to wait 3 or 5 or 10 years to come back and revisit that area with an aircraft or with Jedi or ISAT-2. We've got 4 opportunities per day in most parts of the world to be able to hit the exact same area over and over again. So you think about that. If we were to utilize our full resources of hitting it 4 times per day, and if we were to hit it with multiple revisits for an extended period of time, you can imagine the benefit that can come from that. So even if you don't get a super high fidelity collection on the first try, over time, you've built up these layers, and the layers are what matter.
Yeah, that's amazing, and truthfully a bit mind blowing as you're describing that revisit period and just kind of pulling data together. That's absolutely amazing. And so thinking of that journey, I just finished watching Star Trek Discovery on Crave. I came across this reference online of Mr. Spock. And so what can you tell me about Mr. Spock, and then maybe what the readiness of the constellation is today?
Yeah, so Mr. Spock is our space proof of concept. That's where the name comes from. And really what we're wanting to do is get Mr. Spock up there, demonstrate the capabilities, but there's a second piece of that equation. One of the things that I've learned after advising Earth observation startups for quite some time, one of the things that's most heavily neglected is the ground segment of once you've collected data, Earth observation data, piping it to the ground, processing it, and getting it to a product that can be in the hands of the end user quickly, efficiently, and at scale. Most companies don't really put a solution in place until they've gotten pretty close to launch. And what that means is you have tons of things that aren't ready on the ground and with software. And so Mr. Spock is also about 2 things. One is we've had quite a few customers sign on early with us to get access to that data with Mr. Spock. And what that does is it allows them an opportunity to have access to data before anyone else. But it also allows us the ability to run data through the system and build the pipeline to a highly functioning level so that when we have all of our constellation going up, we don't have this big gap between launch and fully commercial operations. We want to be able to turn on the spigot of data just as soon as we're viable. And that means you got to have the data pipeline, you got to have customer input, and not be building things in a vacuum.
Yeah, and I assume you're drawing maybe a lot of experiences from the Blackbridge days, because I remember we were at one point, working with Blackbridge, and one of the key things was building a receiving station in the high north just to address that. So I suspect you're drawing from all these experiences from your previous journeys and pulling them together. So I guess looking forward are there any forestry folks or any verticals that have surprised you in terms of uh, jumping on board with interest? Because this really is a game changer. Being able to do lidar from space, and as you said, that global coverage, that revisited multiple times, and just having a current DTM all the time. Like, this is truthfully, as I said, mind blowing. But as you've gone through this entrepreneurial journey with this one, are there any interesting verticals that kind of came up, or are they largely lining up with your vision and your mission and your targets or OKRs or whatever? Anything interesting that's kind of come out beyond the usual players and suspects?
You know, there hasn't been a surprise in use cases. I think one of the unique things about how NUVIEW was formed is that many Earth observation companies start with a founder who is an engineer that comes out of a highly technical position, but hasn't had a ton of time in the market to really work with end users. And so what you get many times is you build a great sensor or a cool sensor, and then you try to go figure out the market on what the market does around it, and how they would consume it. We've had the benefit of having worked directly with end users for 15 years in agriculture, in forestry, in defense, in geology, and oil and gas, and like every vertical market. And so it's not surprised me that all of these different vertical markets want our data. What has surprised me is how much they want our data, that we're producing. Like the demand, we had a pretty good indicator what the demand was going to be. But when we went through our preliminary design review of our system with two very prominent stakeholders that I won't mention their name on the air, US government stakeholders, that really want to see the success of a sensor like this. They helped us with our preliminary design review. So they wanted to make sure that this is the real deal. Once we got through that, we signed agreements with 100% of all the customers that we had approached prior to our preliminary design review. And that total came to $1.2 billion in early adopter agreements. And that signaled to us that not only was our estimate strong of the vertical markets that want our data, but the volume of data that they want to consume is much higher than we ever expected. And so that was a really great surprise.
Yeah, crazy numbers are amazing to hear. So I guess maybe I'm curious to pick your brain a little bit as an entrepreneur, having gone through different companies and doing NUVIEW. Some of our digital foresters are entrepreneurs themselves, and I'm just wondering, as we just touched on, NUVIEW's VC back, so you're on a rocket ship, and there's folks pushing you hard, right, to
Right.
deliver, and that's part of being VC back. But for maybe some of our foresters who are trying to be entrepreneurs, are there certain things based on your career, maybe geared towards our technical digital foresters? Are there any things that you've seen in forestry and your experience with LiDAR that you think would be you'd have a different story beyond, hey, I'm going to provide you a three-dimensional point cloud, with a meter spatial resolution, and hey, you tell me how many points you want, because I'm just going to revisit this area multiple times until I get to where we need to be. But are there any use cases in that, and that you've seen that maybe our listeners may not have even thought about?
Well, I can tell you that I don't have any original ideas on forestry. I mean, the forestry community is incredibly tight knit. They know and understand the work that they do better than any one of us possibly could. But what I continuously hear from those in the forestry market, whether that's on the commercial side or whether it's on the government side, or whether it's on the NGO side, is that everyone has a desire to preserve our natural resources, or manage them in a way that represents them as a good steward of the resources that they manage. But I think that the single biggest thing that I hear is, Clint, we don't understand how much we actually have, meaning how much in forestry, in resources, how much carbon we've preserved. And I think the number one signal that I get from that market is that, with Earth observation data, whether it's optical or radar, that exists today, you're doing a lot of estimation, right? You're looking at canopy, you're trying to make some, you do a few bits of ground control to really understand, or ground truthing to understand small parts, and then you extrapolate across a bigger picture. And with LiDAR, you move from estimating to accounting, right? Because you can suddenly get canopy penetration. You can understand with precision the height of a tree. You can understand the width of the crown or the body of a tree. And now we can suddenly get into a case where we understand the volume of carbon and biomass that's represented in an area better than we ever could before. And I think if you take that core fundamental principle and you apply it to the commercial world, where we need to understand, our stock and stand count, if you apply it to the preservation world and NGOs that just want to make sure we preserve our natural resources and so on, all of these things kind of have the same principle. We need to understand what's actually there and account for it, and move beyond estimation.
For sure, for sure. And for our audience, I'm intentionally not trying to ask technical questions, in the weeds that most people know. I could, just because given the work you're doing, that's proprietary to NUVIEW, and I don't want to put us offline on that sense. One thing that I know people often talk about is this whole, and you've heard it back in the early days, the whole data fusion side of things. And in forestry, great, we've got structural signatures from LiDAR, but that species component. What does data fusion mean to NUVIEW? What can you share about that? Are there plans to mix that multispectral, hyperspectral, where you came from on the EO side, with some of this active remote sensing work you're doing? Could you see a future where something like that exists?
Oh, 100%. We are a company that is, there are two ways I like to think about our company when we're talking to both partners and to investors, and probably less so with end users of the data, but we like to think of ourselves commercially as a partner first strategy, which means we truly believe in a rising tide lifts all boats. And when that comes to data fusion, I think you only pigeonhole yourself into, or paint yourself into a corner, if you try to create a walled garden where you're not working with anyone else and you think your solution is the end all be all and the silver bullet. Like, I think we're going to create more market than we consume, meaning I think the market gets so much bigger because of what we're able to produce. That's a unique data set, that it's not going to cannibalize the size of the market that's out there, although we will probably take a certain meaningful percentage of it. But I think we're going to replace things that were not good enough solutions, but it's the only solution that was available. So I can see us working really tightly with the guys that run the constellations and synthetic aperture radar. I can see us working really closely with hyperspectral and thermal and traditional multispectral. So I would welcome all partners there. So that's the first part, is that I see us as a partner first company. But partner first company leads into the next part as well, which is, I really see us as a machine to machine or API driven company, where we're going to have a great solution. We're really far along in a platform, in a user interface for people to access data, whether that's ours or multimodal data. But the real value, I think, comes into when we play well with others, and we start to connect in, and we allow the connection of our archive and data sets into their archive and data sets, and that flows back and forth. Because when you think about the term that you brought up there with data fusion, it's important to remember data fusion is a process. It's not a product, and like every single use case is going to require or desire a different type of data fusion, whether that's optical and LiDAR, whether it's thermal and LiDAR or SAR and LiDAR, or maybe it doesn't include LiDAR at all. But data fusion is about solving the problem for the end user, not just simply dominating the market.
For sure, for sure. So what I heard is NUVIEW is going to focus on the hardware, the constellation, collecting data. It's not, a priority to build all these, other services beyond data. Let partners do that and work together. Very, very cool. So if the average Joe Forster was listening to this, because guaranteed, I suspect this will maybe blow some of our statistics on this podcast because it's so novel, which is a good thing, by the way. But of course, there's probably going to go like, oh, okay, this is amazing. Or they're going to say, I don't believe this. This is smoke and mirrors. It's always an extreme with Forsters. I think it's we need them in the middle. But having said that,
Yeah.
what can you share about the average Joe getting access to data, and then following on from that, are the costs, the economics just really geared towards a geoint or large companies? Like, what can you share on that front? Or is it too early in the sense like we're not sure how we would, onboard a million acre company or a small 20,000 acre private woodlot? What can you share on that front?
Yeah, so it's really clear to us that as I kind of build on my last statement that we're a partner first strategy. So we have already a network that we've been building. We've just not announced it publicly, of partners around the world that specialize in certain areas. We even have one that's super specialized in forestry. And so what I would suggest is that for those that wish to learn more at this point, they can reach out to us directly, and then we'll be happy to have a discussion. But then we'll probably collaborate with our partner that specializes in that vertical market to make sure that there's a pathway to access to data. And what we're trying to do is create a scale that doesn't, make LiDAR data unreachable and unmanageable for the average user. We want to bring enough scale to the market that it brings LiDAR within reach to any user that wants to use LiDAR. We don't want to price anyone out of the market. We don't want to make something inaccessible. So we will connect with partners. Partners work with end users, but an Earth observation company rarely has the capability and scale to work with each individual user of the data in a very meaningful way. So and we also know we can't be experts in every single vertical market. So we'll have in-house teams in forestry and agriculture and all of these pieces, but it's not with the intent to bypass our partners in the market. It's the intent to enable our partners in the market to serve end users.
Yeah, for sure. Very, very cool. And so thinking of that and going forward, again, we'll when we wrap up, we'll exchange some contact information there. But as we look forward, NUVIEW is presenting the art of the possible, if that's the right word. If we think broader terms in technology, again, you've been at this for, as you said, 15, 20 years with some very well-known organizations and have a lot of experience, or you also have a lot of arrows in your back, depending what day it is, right?
Right.
But thinking of that and that journey, I'm just curious, what gets you excited looking beyond maybe the mission you're on right now? Are there certain technologies that have come about that now you're the hamster wheels, if you will, are going even faster? We're like, oh God, like if we can finish this part of the NUVIEW mission, there's these other things we can do. Are there certain other things that get you uber excited looking into the future of technology, or even Earth observation in general, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. So Earth observation is really where my heart is. But I also have this piece of me that is extremely biased towards deeper space exploration as well. And as we as a species start to move past living on this one planet, there's a lot that we need to know about other planets and other bodies that we approach as a species, whether that's colonization, whether that's exploration. But one thing's for sure, we're not going to stop exploring as a species. We're not going to stop needing to understand the place we inhabit. But one thing is also for sure, humans irreversibly change everything they touch. And what I want to do is continue to create a record of how things are wherever we go, so that we have an archive to understand how things have changed over time. Because if we can break things, we can fix things, right? And I want to help put our species on a path to be able to understand every world, every body that we approach, so that we can replenish and replace anything that we touch.
So many questions pop to mind that I want to that I want to get. So
Yeah.
the one I'll ask is, hey, we some might say like, hey, as human species, we touch thing, and you're careful and like, are we positively touching something or negatively touching something? And yet there's probably a technologist argument there that yes, there's so much innovation that we can still bring to mankind and Earth that it's not all doomsday scenario. But thinking of that, is that something that as you're looking for, let's say, fundraising and stuff, was that key in the partners you're looking for to work with that shared that longer range view? And really where I'm going at is, have you met Leonardo DiCaprio? Because I believe he's one of your investors. What can you share on that front in terms of that bigger picture story of species and exploration and the people that you've partnered or put around you to put you on that path?
We've met many and all of our investors, I think is the best way to put that. And we understand what their needs are. We also understand what their interests are. And I would say that I can't imagine us taking on an investor or a partner of any kind that didn't align with what we want to achieve as a citizen of the planet, and that has the best interests of the planet in mind. And so I think when you look at how we are going forward, again, we've met all of our investors, and I think we're well aligned in where we're going on everything. But I would say, moving out to further planets, and other heavenly bodies, and taking that the next step, I think investors all love that, but it's certainly not a requirement of our partners to have that same ambition. We're in the business of solving customer needs and helping them solve their needs and their problems in new ways or their challenges. So for me, the most important thing is, are we helping them solve their problems, more than anything else?
For sure, for sure. Now, looking at my notes here and questions, I know there's one that got popped up, and I'll ask it, although you'll probably chuckle because you've probably answered this 27 million times or some obscene number. But is NUVIEW technology going to replace everything we know about airborne, terrestrial, handheld LiDAR, like all things LiDAR can just go away and NUVIEW is going to crush it?
I hope not. Like I hope it doesn't replace everything. That for me, that would be like saying we're going to replace all spoons with knives. Like I don't think that's what you do. Like all of these tools are very special in their use case in what problems they solve. And so I imagine that we're going to be working with, for example, it may not make sense for an aerial or UAV LiDAR organization to image an entire state. It may make sense for them to image the high density urban areas, or areas where we need super high density, point cloud, and then we take care of the broad area. And so I would imagine a world where we cooperate to provide the best solution possible for the stakeholders that are interested in having data over that area. So if it were a province in Canada, I can imagine that we would cooperate to where we do the wide area, another group does the high point density areas over cities and in urban areas. Forestry gets the data set delivered the way that they want to, agriculture the way that they want to. And then something else we bring that's special to the table is the revisit, so we can make decisions throughout the year, throughout the season in real time. So I hope we don't replace all of those. I hope we make, I actually think we're going to grow the market for LiDAR data by about 30x, like the entire market. And so my mission is to grow the market, not to push anyone out of the market.
Food for thought, food for thought. And truthfully, if we put it in a forestry context, back in the early days of 2000, when we had aircraft that were flying profiles, and if we got a pulse per square meter was hallelujah, we're high density, and this is the CSVs on CDs, and we're probably going to date ourselves because some listeners will be like, the heck is a DVD? It's like, how do you use that for data transfer? But that was the norm. But one of the threads was there were researchers from the Pacific Forestry Center up here in Canada that were always looking at this transect and then using a high density approach and then scaling out using that data. And I wonder as we go forward whether this is simply changing how we're using some of our existing technologies, whether for calibration validation work or something of that nature. But do you see that as a trend maybe, or what trends do you see now that you're introducing this, again, commercial offering at the space level, planetary coverage, high revisit times. Are you seeing a change in the discourse between how people have traditionally done it and really thinking how they could leverage this NUVIEW technology and data as a game changer?
Yeah, I think that's 100% happening. I think the first response you get with any first of anything is either it can't be done or shouldn't be done or something like that. But again, another case where I wouldn't name the group, but I was with a group of about 100 experts in this field, specifically in LiDAR on instrumentation a couple of weeks ago. And they said for the last, I think it was the last 3 months, we have had more questions about how NUVIEW can affect what we do than any other subject we've talked about. And so they decided to invite NUVIEW to do a briefing because they got tired of fielding all the questions, right? And this was 100 of the most prominent scientists in LiDAR in this meeting. And so for me, I think that's the clearest signal, is that people are starting to look like, what could I do if I had data every day? What could I do if I had data every month or every week? Instead of, okay, we have to be satisfied with data once every 5 years. What can we do with every 5 years? People have switched to saying, making the best of what we have, to what if we had this, how much more could we achieve? And that's the biggest pivot I've seen.
Yeah, amazing. And I'm dying to know, with 100 brilliant minds, how did that day look? Like yoga at 6 a.m. with your espresso, or was it just hardcore meetings, questions, rapid fire, go, go, go? Is it the most exhausting day of your life? Or you didn't have to do it, one of your technical leads did a mind meld with somebody else?
Oh, you're going to love this. It was more like walking into a surprise birthday party. Like, I didn't know I was meeting with the whole group, and I was invited to come in and talk. And only a couple, I might be wrong on the time frame of minutes or hours or whatever it was before the meeting started, did I realize, like, this was a Zoom meeting where I was presenting to a group of people, most of them in person, a bunch of them online. Like, I had no idea it was this scale. And so I walked into it and it was more like, surprise, here's 100 people. But I think it helped because it was a more authentic meeting where we got to discuss a lot of really cool things and get through the future of what's possible. Whereas if I'd had weeks to think about what am I going to present to the 100 most knowledgeable scientists in this area, I might have, I don't know, I might have approached it a different way, but I think it came out in the most authentic way possible.
Right, right. Might have made you think twice about showing up to that.
Right.
Should I be the one going to this with all these brains in the room? Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Good times, good times. So looking forward, I guess, what does artificial intelligence mean to you? And as you're saying, species, extraplanetary exploration, obviously, I'm assuming UV technology can play a pivotal role in that, because if you can image this planet, then surely you can do it elsewhere, and you need to know what things look like, or the topography of those other places.
Mhm.
But as you think about AI, because it's with generative AI in the press all the time, like every day there's something new from OpenAI and ChatGPT or any other AI technology. What does that mean for NewView? Does it mean anything, or is it business as usual of we're dealing with data, we've got large volumes of data, or maybe NewView's fits all the pillars of big data in terms of variety of satellites, maybe the same type of data, maybe slightly different volume. But is AI something that keeps you up at night, or gets you up in the morning, or not so much?
Absolutely gets me up in the morning. It's that caliber. So one thing that I think I could prove if I had to pull out the documentation is we were diving deep into AI and ML before it was cool, to fundraise on that subject. We firmly believe that of all Earth observation data sets, like, it would be tough to convince me otherwise, but that all Earth observation data sets, LiDAR will be the most powerful in AI and machine learning capabilities. Because if you think about, dealing with an image off of a multispectral satellite, or if you're dealing with, quote unquote, an image out of synthetic aperture radar, you're dealing with this massive view of a scene, right? And there's lots to interpret, and it's kind of difficult sometimes. But when you have LiDAR data, every single LiDAR point is a discrete value and has discrete data associated with that point. That makes it really sharp for AI and ML understanding and capabilities. And so I think that our data will feed AI and ML partners, and we'll have some capabilities internally as well. But if you think about any application, understanding vegetation, understanding change in 3 dimensions, understanding temporal change, all of these things are so precise when it comes to LiDAR data point clouds that I think there's going to be, once we bear hug this thing and get our arms around it as a society, there's no data set that's going to be better for AI and ML than LiDAR data.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, just the sheer volume, and yeah, it's amazing on that front. Any other technologies that, as you know, the CEO of NUVIEW, talking to the digital forester community, any other technologies that you'd say, hey, ladies and gentlemen, you should keep an eye out because Clint here is watching as well. Anything cool coming down the pipe that the average person may not be aware of?
Wow, let's see. So your question is about LiDAR, or is it about forestry, or anything?
In general tech, is there something else out there that's coming that we may not have privy to or be aware of, because you get to see it from a different lens and working on the bleeding edge?
Yeah, so I am a huge fan of these large language models that we've been looking at, like ChatGPT and et cetera, and um, love generative AI. And I think it's going to make us all almost superhuman in our capabilities of being efficient and scale of our work. But rather than say, look for this, I don't think I have any unique insight into a new technology that our listeners on this podcast would know about. What I would say is that one thing I've become privy to is that the ability to do the ability for organizations to use generative AI to spoof real data, I think is getting quite large. And so there are a lot of markets that aren't that interesting for people to spoof data. But what I would say is that's something, as a group of technologists, whether you work in forestry or agriculture or any other field, that we need to be aware of. Is we need to be on the lookout for bad actors that would use generative AI to create false or misleading data that's hard. I mean, like a deep fake that you would see of, on the internet or something like that. Deep fake of Earth observation data is something that we're actively thinking about, and we think all Earth observation companies should be thinking about at this point.
Wow, never thought of it that way, because I know, with kids, 3 girls, at one point I heard the story where kids would share their social media video, someone would take it, train an AI, the AI would then call grandma and grandpa and say, hey, I need money. and and
Yeah.
it's a generative AI, it can answer questions back and forth from grandma and grandpa. And I was like, wow, that's the next level phishing. But using your example, I've never thought of it that way, that is a scenario where maybe a bad actor is presenting some type of data set that isn't accurate or truthful, in the hope of inciting some response, or maybe getting someone to take action that they otherwise might not be. Yeah, okay,
Yep.
that's scary.
Yeah. So, I'd say we never meet, we as a company never make fear-based decisions. We make informed decisions. And I would say that to the listeners out there as well. In your unique vertical market, you can't make decisions based on fear. You can't avoid any data because it might be spoofed or generated in a way that uh, a bad actor would use. But it never hurts to be diligent to understand what's happening. So the good thing is, for the average user, there's a world of professionals and technology leaders that are thinking about this already and working to head it off. But I think that's the thing that we want to be aware of, is that there, not everyone works in honest and open ways. Some people have nefarious intentions, and we just need to be all working as a community to make sure that data is used for the right way. And I heard an accountant say one time a saying that I'm going to translate over into data. It's like, the data never lies, but people lie with data. right? And so I want to make sure that we're always good stewards of the resource that we have, that we're working with people that are good stewards of the resources that they manage, and that as partners we can all affect a positive outcome.
For sure, for sure. Well said. So as we look to wind down, maybe one last question as for our audience who are saying, hey, when can we expect the NUVIEW global map, 1 meter spatial resolution? Like how far out are we if I want to participate and work with your partner network that's still not disclosed? But how far are we out in terms of before people can start, placing orders, if that's the right word, of saying, hey, I'm interested in this and queue things up? Is there a time frame you can share at this time?
So we're not disclosing our time frame out there, and we're probably further along than most think, but not as far along as anyone would like us to be. Like we all want to move as fast as possible because we see the demand and the need, and if I could put these things up tomorrow, we would, right? We want to get there and start executing on our orders as quickly as we can. So I would say that we're not in the business of publishing our timeline yet. But we are, like all of our partners that we're working with, that we signed agreements with, they know and understand the timeline so far.
Awesome, awesome. So as we look to wind down, what if you were to give our digital forester community one piece of advice based on what you know right now, and obviously you touched on it, estimating versus often in forestry people say it's a wall-to-wall census, like there's no more trying to fill in these gaps. It's like you need so many points that it's essentially a wall-to-wall census. But obviously, having worked in agriculture and forestry and knowing the space, what's your final recommendation as you're thinking to this community, where some are still truthfully pencil and paper, some are further along with full enterprise geospatial systems deployed, leveraging individual tree inventories derived from Lidar with like satellite EO data already coming in? Is there one final statement, I guess, that you would share with the digital forester community on what the future could look like?
Yeah, no matter what you're doing, no matter what you're pursuing, never accept that the status quo is good enough. And keep pushing for more, push people like me for more, demand more, have strong requirements on what you want to see the market bring to be able to better solve your problems. Never settle for what's in the market today. Push for what you want to see in the market tomorrow.
Perfect, perfect. Now, for folks who might want to follow up and reach out with you, is there a good way to reach out? Is a website, social, email, or how can folks get a hold of NUVIEW? I believe the website is nuview.space, so NUVIEW. But if folks want to get a hold of you, Clint, what's the best way that they can reach you?
Yeah, my inbox tends to blow up after these podcasts. So I would like if you emailed info@nuview.space, info@nuview.space, and outline what you'd like to visit about. And we've got resources from every part, whether it's the business side, sales and business development, whether it's engineering, if you want to understand more about how the product is made and how we get where we're going. All of those are fair game. Start with info and we'll direct it to the right people. Otherwise, I get an unmanageable number of emails after these things.
I hear you. I hear you. Well, hey man, I appreciate you carving out some time for this guy. I know we have a couple mutual connections, and they were key, at least for me, behind the scenes, saying that you need to talk with Clint. You need to talk with Clint. But definitely appreciate you making the time for this guy and the Digital Forester podcast and sharing your thoughts on what NUVIEW is doing and where it's going. It's amazing. I look forward to seeing NUVIEW unfold and execute on its mission. And thanks so much for your time, and looking forward to staying in touch.
Thanks, Kevin. It was a pleasure.